Kip Gering from Itron in the room? Yes. Awesome. Your mic's waiting back there, and I'll start explaining and setting us up. If you could sit here, because we're in, your mic's in a certain way. So welcome, everyone, to our audience crowdsourced session. Everyone has, hopefully, clickers. This is the fun, interactive session of the morning. You all are part of the panel, and will be participating. So a number of you are probably familiar with how this works from previous GTM conferences. If this is your first conference, what we will essentially be going through is you will see a series of questions come up on the screen. And then everyone will have 10 minutes to essentially vote for a particular response. There are multiple choice questions on the screen. We'll then show the responses live immediately after you voted. And then we will also, our panelists will be voting, and then we'll hear how our panelists voted, and also they may respond to how you all voted, and essentially live react to taking the temperature in the room. So it's really exciting. We hope you all participate. You'll see the countdown on the actual screens as we go through each question, but as we go through each one, I'll make sure everyone knows when voting is open and when voting is closed. So with that, we have our first question, which essentially is, which grid edge technology will see the most rapid growth within the next 5 years? So voting is now open. You all have 10 seconds to vote on either A, advanced consumer analytics, B, demand response automation, C, vehicle to grid, D, load forecasting and optimization, and E, asset health and analytics. Oh, what happened there? Hold on 1 second. All right, it looks like we have a technical difficulty on the first question. So,
how about we introduce yourselves while you're having technical
Yes, let's do that.
Hi, my name is Martha Symko-Davies. I'm from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I work on energy systems integration, research, and development.
Hi, I'm Einat, Dorobantu. Can you hear me? I don't know if this is on.
It should be on.
It is? Oh, okay. I'm Einat Dorobantu. I work for Eversource Energy. And everyone that looked at me funny when I said that is the old Northeast Utilities and the merged N-Star company. Together, the name has changed to Eversource Energy. So it's the company that serves electric, residential, commercial customers in Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts.
Great.
Hello, I'm Kip Gering from Itron, and I am the Director of Product Management for Smart Grid Solutions.
Hi, I'm Namish Patel, CEO of Gridco Systems.
Great, thank you all. So we're going to try this again. Now, we're going to skip that first question, obviously for technical difficulties, and I want to make sure we actually get all the responses from the audience. Now you know our panel, and we're going to move on to the second question, which is...
Oh, you had results.
Yeah, there was only like 5 or 6, so I'm going to skip and move on.
Did people not vote?
No, you had the results in there.
Yeah, but there weren't as many. There were only 7 results. Oh. Yeah. Okay, reset. First question. What percentage of customers in the US, both residential and commercial and industrial combined, will actively participate in demand-side management programs in 2020? And to provide a baseline for folks in the room, currently about 12.5 million US customers, or around 8%, are currently participating in demand-side management programs. So, voting will open starting now, and please choose between A, 15%, B, 20%, C, 25%, D, 30%, and E, more than 30%. And now I can see that we're getting all of our votes in. And voting has closed. Let's take a look at the results. Wow, okay. Large majority of you voted either 15 or 20%. Martha, what was your vote?
So I am very conservative at times, and so I voted A, which is so not me. But that is truly because the policy will impact this, I believe, in the near future. The utilities are changing. people have to start to sacrifice. Demand responses are requiring changes, but at the end of the day, as we develop the data, it's going to impact the policy, and I think that will overall result in this 15% bracket.
Great.
I voted A as well, because I agree with Martha. I think there's doubling in 5 years is tremendous growth. So let's not underestimate what A means. In addition, I like the question of one of the individuals in the previous session that asked, do we even know what the customer wants? And it's a fundamental question here, because ultimately demand-side management is entering into customers' homes and providing them services or changing their behaviors to provide something that we are not sure they want to participate in. The penetration of the DSM or demand-side management will increase. I don't think it will increase that dramatically in the next 5 years. Ultimately, it will increase. I agree, it will double. But I think there's a long way for us to explore what customers want and for customers to understand what capabilities there are out there for them to take advantage of.
Great. Kip?
Yes, I agree with you. I selected A, and I think a lot of this will be the result of policy. And I think the more that you see, for example, dynamic pricing go mainstream, I think you'll see more and more participation accelerate because of that.
I similarly chose A for the sort of simple reason that I think it will continue to be dominated by C&I customers because they can have a significant impact. Whereas in the residential case, the behavioral change that's required, I think, is a harder and more unsustainable thing to rely on.
Great. So conservative panel on demand-side management for sure. Next question, and this is meant to kind of lighten the room and provide a little bit of humor, but which industry buzzword will we all be using in 5 years? Will it be A, grid of everything, B, locational marginal pricing, which I think is a topic that we heard a bit kind of mentioned in earlier panels, C, the plug-and-play grid platform, D, the independent distribution system operator, E, grid edge, putting in a plug for that one, and F, others. So voting is open, and you have 10 seconds starting now. Great, voting is now closed, and let's see what you all selected. C, the plug-and-play grid platform, interesting. Kip, what did you pick?
Mic check. I chose grid edge, and the reason I chose
like that.
Yeah, the reason I chose that though is I believe that there's a lot of technology that is out there today. We talk about the Internet of Things. There's a lot of computing power and sensors that can be deployed in across the grid. And it's because of that, I think we'll see a lot of acceleration in how we solve problems within the grid using sensors and other digital assets to take action and improve the reliability of the grid there. So
Great. Namish?
I chose other.
And what is your other?
Oh, I didn't come up with another. I just chose other.
You can't pick
I'm just betting it's not A through E.
That was an easy way out. Einat?
Oh, I actually chose other, but I do have another name. My creative approach is the modernized grid. And I actually would like to also caveat that by saying I don't think it's in 5 years. I think the future is today. And anyone from the utility side that's probably sitting in the audience, including myself and the company I work with, are thinking every day about how do we plan, how do we operate, how do we build the modern grid. So to me, the other options were too narrow for a buzzword to be used in the future. So I would stick with that.
Fair enough. Martha?
So I chose grid edge. It's the smart systems at the end of the grid, pushing it to the edge. And so I think that actually encompasses plug-and-play grid platforms. I think a lot of these feed into it. And so if you think of it as terms of smart technologies and pushing it to the edge, then I think you bring in the whole, all these different pieces, as well as others that we haven't quite identified yet.
Great. And I will say, I will be around for lunch, so if any of the 31 people want to share what some of their other buzzwords are, I'd be interested to hear them for sure.
I thought you were suggesting you're buying lunch. So
Question 4. Over the next 5 years, which grid edge market will see the most M&A activity? And I'm glad we're asking this question because we missed the first question, but really this is all around where do you see a lot of the action happening within the next 5 years within a particular grid edge technology? Do you think it's around A, analytics, B, energy storage, C, various different communications technologies, D, demand-side management, or E, home energy management solutions? Voting is now open, so you have 10 seconds to select your answer. Great. And the results. Wow, energy storage and analytics certainly leading with home energy management solutions pretty close behind. Namish, what was your vote?
I chose energy storage, in part because I think that the physical nature of developing energy storage will actually require there to be M&A activity to be able to scale it. Because I think, much as we've found in other hard science types of investments, it's quite difficult actually to fund such companies for the long term. And so I think that the most likely scenario for achieving the economics of energy storage will be for the big incumbents to actually acquire those companies.
Fair point. Kip?
I chose data analytics. I think as the grid becomes more connected and we collect more and more data, that there will be some firms that really accelerate the innovation that create value for utilities. As they do this, I think some of the larger, more traditional data analytics firms will acquire that IP.
Martha?
So I chose E, home energy management solutions, because it impacts every single homeowner, all of you folks out there. And as we become smarter with our technologies and the ability to integrate and have them communicate, people want to be able to, for example, handle things from their cell phone. When the Nest thermostat came out, everybody was jumping on to getting a Nest thermostat. And so people are really wanting to be able to bring in, even as your smart car, you can now you can do pretty much anything you want in your car and talk in the speakerphone, et cetera. So I think because it's near and dear to so many homeowners and the ability to easily work with your cell phone and different technologies, I think that's the number one area.
Maybe not.
I voted B, energy storage. Am I the only one that voted that?
No, Namish did as well.
So we're thinking alike today. The reason I voted that is because, in my mind, energy storage is supporting technology. But it's not just supporting on the utility side. It's also supporting on the customer side. So it's serving both sides of the, we'll call it the grid edge, right? So the outer edge and the inner edge, or the inner to the edge grid. And there's a ton of competition right now in energy storage, and there's a lot of value propositions and different products that are out there. Just walking down the hall, I had several conversations with energy storage in companies, and it is just tremendous, the amount of innovation, product offerings, partnerships and collaborations between different entities and what they're trying to offer other utilities or customers. So ultimately, as this product will mature, as we are now, I still think in the very, very beginning of its maturity phase, or it's not even maturity, if it's an entrance into the market, it will streamline itself to product offerings that are eventually going to merge into what eventually the market will use. So as Kip said, the bigger companies will start taking wind of that and acquiring the smaller companies to create a much stronger value proposition, as well as the ability to see the price drop and the offerings become more cost effective across the customer end of it, the utilities and the individual customers.
Great. Next question. Which percentage of generation in regulated IOU, investor-owned utility territories, will come from customer-owned distributed energy resources in 2050? Less than 5%, 5 to 10%, 10 to 15%, 15 to 20%, or more than 20%? Time horizon on this is 2050. Voting is open and starts now. And excellent. Let's see the results.
Not everybody voted this time.
E, more than 20%. Wow, bullish crowd. Martha, you have a unique perspective from NREL, I'm sure, on this. So why don't you kick us off?
So I voted for D, 15 to 20%, because of the trends that we're seeing. Not only out there are we seeing the gigawatts of photovoltaics, PV, but also high penetration of EVs. And so you're starting to see that blend, how they all come together. And so I believe, based on the trends and impacts and looking at storage and cycling times, et cetera, and working with the manufacturers, I think we're headed towards that 15 to 20%.
Great. Hamish?
Yeah, I chose E also. I think that at a basic level here, 2050, I think, makes this answer relatively simple because, with 30 years of compounding of an exponential growth curve, I think you can pretty easily get to 20%. But more fundamentally, I think that the competitive dynamics that are driving the economics of adoption of DER seem to be only getting stronger. And as a result, I think there's a continual fuel for that growth.
Great. Einat, why don't you give us a utility view on this?
I voted E.
Okay.
I think, well, because initially when I was thinking about this question, I was trying to figure out where we're going to be in 5 years, 10 years, and then realizing it's 2050. There's going to be so much technological advancement, and Martha, I'm sure, is driving some of it with NREL, that by 2050, I mean, we're seeing by 2025 in the Northeast, we can hit 20% penetration of PV, let alone DER as a whole. So I think it's not aggressive at all to see 20%. Now, I would caveat it a little bit because maybe not all territories will grow at such an aggressive pace, and there will be states in the nation that will have a much slower growth, but as an aggregate, it is feasible to see 20%, more than 20% of DR in 2050.
Great. Kip, thoughts?
Yeah, so I was not quite as bullish, Steve. I chose 15 to 20%.
Okay.
But I think we all know how important policy is to some of this, but the economics are there and they will continue to improve. And I think from a socioeconomic standpoint, we will see that demographic actually grow to people who really care about distributed energy resources, both from a sustainability perspective and the fact that it is just generally good. And second, electricity is very, very important. And so as we deal with more and more natural disasters and things like that, people are very interested in protecting their own interests there as well.
Great. We're going to pivot a bit and talk about and ask a question related to microgrids. So the question here is, which factor will be the largest contributor to microgrid infrastructure development over the next 5 years? Is it going to be the grid parity of solar plus storage deployments? Will it be utility resiliency and reliability needs? Is it going to be large C&I demand, or actually the ability to participate in grid services? We had a number of folks who were at the pre-conference yesterday probably have some thoughts based on that discussion, but would be interested to poll the whole crowd and see what we think. Voting is open and starting now, 10 seconds. Great, and let's see the results. Wow, grid parity of solar plus storage deployment immediately following utility resiliency and reliability needs. Namish, why don't you kick us off? Let us know what you voted and then also your reaction to what the audience voted as well.
Sure, so I had actually chosen B, utility resiliency, and I think in part of this question comes down to scale. And I think there are good reasons, fundamental reasons for utilities actually to invest in what you can call microgrids themselves for the purposes of enhancing resiliency, initially in very remote areas, but over time, even as more of a standard practice for, in effect, creating a federated and hierarchical structure to the delivery of power to consumers. I think actually the utilities will if we look in practice, drive a lot more of the actual deployment. I think 5 years is is the reason I didn't choose A. Because, fundamentally, generation, the cost of generation does follow a scaling law. In other words, you get economies of scale as you generate bigger and bigger and bigger size of power. And I think microgrids, for the purposes of economics, I still think will continue to be difficult, particularly if they're reliant on storage.
Great. Kip?
I chose B. I think when it comes, over the next 5 years, I do know that just some of the information that we received through our resourcefulness index was that, at the top of utility executives' minds was resiliency and reliability needs of delivering power, and dealing with the disruptions and the imbalances that occur through distributed energy resources. They're going to have to deal with that. And one way to deal with that is the deploying of technology and focusing on the impact that technologies associated with the microgrid can bring.
Great. You've done a lot of work in this space, Einat, so.
I'm a little biased as the Director of System Resiliency and Strategy for Eversource in Connecticut. I voted B as well. I believe that the cost of storage is, in my mind, still high to create that grid parity between solar and storage for the deployment of microgrids. Microgrids are still expensive. For customers to start deploying on their own without the support of policy. We see that in Connecticut. We have a long-standing program in Connecticut that developed microgrids and continue to develop microgrids. And we find that you can make it as easy as you want to customers, but ultimately there will be hurdles for customers to overcome the cost of generation. From a utilities perspective, reliability is paramount, right? The first thing we think about every day when we wake up is how do we make sure we provide the best top reliability we can for our customers. And resiliency, and I support Kip's thinking, is something that we, in the wake of Storm Sandy and the other two storms that have hit the Northeast, but across the nation, resiliency is something that is becoming, again, a focal point for the company, and without it, there will be no reliability. So utility investment and the thinking, the development of the thinking around microgrids from a utilities perspective, and I think the Borrego Springs example is excellent to show how you could not just provide resiliency, but you could provide many other grid services through microgrids. They are utility-owned, developed, and what I liked about that one is actually it's a circuit-based or feeder-based microgrid, which allows to extract other benefits that if you would have done it in a much more localized approach, as far as, for instance, building-based. A lot of customers are trying to just hook up a bunch of buildings and try to create that microgrid. The economies of scale when you do it along the circuit or feeder or at a substation pan out much differently and much more favorable.
Great. Martha?
So I voted for B, utility resiliency and
Very
reliability.
agreeable panel.
Woohoo! We're doing it. But really, a lot of the microgrid development has stemmed around natural disasters. And so in what you see out there today, the larger scale ones have stemmed in that direction. But people are not interested in ever experiencing another Hurricane Sandy. How do you deal with this? And so from that perspective, you're seeing a lot of cases of microgrids around that technology.
Great. So resiliency is the winner, at least here on stage. Next question, and this is an interesting one. Which will be the next state to take utility regulatory transformation in a comparable scope to New York's reforming the energy vision? Will it be Illinois, North Carolina, New Jersey, Maryland, Georgia? And if you don't think it's any one of those, please pick other, and then please let us know what your thinking is. Voting is now open. Please all select your answer. Great. And our results, F, other. So Martha, why don't we?
Steve doesn't know the answer. The options.
So if you look, maybe everybody put California. I'm not sure what they put for their other. I'd be curious what you did for your others. But after California, what you see is there's a lot of photovoltaics PV being deployed in North Carolina. You've got Duke there, center right there, making some tremendous disruptive impact. So I would put North Carolina as my choice.
Great. Kip.
I chose D, Maryland. I think the results from the task force, the Resiliency of Microgrids task force that Governor O'Malley set up, had some really transformative things where they were both addressing technology as well as some of the regulatory and policy needs there that I think showed that they were pretty serious about it.
Great. Namish?
I chose California, mostly because I think the DRP filing that is about to occur is a step in that direction, quite a considerable step, actually. So I think California is likely to be next.
So is your thought then, because that's an interesting point, is your thought then that the DRP filings kick off a series of events that kind of change the utility into a platform provider similar to what New York's looking at?
Well, I think that discussion's already happening,
right.
Frankly. And the question, I suppose, is really one of how close to New York's REV structure would we actually find in California. But valuation of resources is fundamental to any type of regulatory transformation. And so because that's already underway, it seems something's going to pop out of that. Right. I don't know if it will be REV-like or not. But.
Okay. Einat.
I chose other.
Okay.
Now I have to tell you which one. So I was debating actually between California and actually Minnesota. I've done some research, and in the past I've looked into, as we're looking into business models in the Northeast, we started looking outside the Northeast to see what everybody else is doing. And I really took this question as not just where we're going to see most net metering or most solar penetration or most aggressive regulator that's creating a legislature that's creating policies for additional penetration. I took it as who's actually taken a completely creative change of the old business way we were doing business, as was mentioned in the previous panels, and starting to look into not just reforming the energy vision, but reforming the regulatory model that the utilities are so confined within. And the reason I chose Minnesota is because it has still such a different approach than New York. They're doing it in a collaborative process. The E21 effort that's going on over there is very interesting, and I will encourage everybody to take a peek and read about it. It's not just the utility and the regulator and stakeholders from across the industry, basically maybe someone from each one of the representatives in this room that are trying to solve the problem. And I think this has the potential to create the right solution where we're not, holding each other's arms and trying to wrestle who's going to win that one. Are we going to have net metering or not? Who's going to? If we look at what I called earlier the modernized grid, there's really the customer is right in the center of it. There's the utility which provides that platform or that grid for folks to interconnect or for the business to be conducted and the services to be delivered. There's the grid edge service providers, and lots of you in the room. And there is also the regulatory side of things and the business modeling side that has to work. If any one of those three circles that are surrounding the customers will not work financially to sustain itself as a business, we're not going to have a good outcome at the end of it. So I believe Minnesota is trying to go in the direction of a collaborative approach. I found that when we did microgrids in Connecticut, it worked very well. Okay. So I voted other.
Great. Just quick show of hands. Of the 44 folks who picked other, how many of those were California? A fair number of them. Okay, so that makes sense. Great. Next question, it's comic relief time. When will we stop using the term utility of the future? Voting is now open. Will it be at the end of this conference? Will it be this year? Do you prefer utility 2.0? Or never, it's the best term you've heard in decades? Voting is open. Just curious, comic relief moment. Great. This year, please. Just any comments or thoughts?
Not everybody voted either.
No.
They don't understand the joke.
Any thoughts, one way or the other? Or suggestions for better terms for the future utility?
Well, so I'll just say it is what it is. It is this today, and where the utilities and the manufacturers are working together to define and bring together the right business models. For example, if you look at large-scale inverters and there was an outage, whose responsibility would it be at the end of the day? Is it the manufacturers? Is it the utilities? And so as we're starting to look at all these new technologies that are developing, it is just this, utility of the future.
It's utility of today. I voted this year, please.
Agreed.
Just because I really think it's just today.
And the future too, right?
Any other thoughts?
Well, I think I voted D, but I think you just
D, okay.
and the reason is you never get there, right? So it's going to be an ongoing conversation, and transformation is not something that happens overnight. I think it depends. The dialogue that we have as an industry, both from a business, regulatory, and utility side, is key to pushing forward.
Great. Hamish? No. Okay, interesting question. So outside of California and PJM, which state will see the most growth in its utility scale energy storage deployment pipeline over the next 5 years? We have a lot of energy storage folks in the room, so we'll be interested to see the results here. Do you think it'll be A, New York, B, Hawaii, C, Texas, D, Arizona, or some other state? And voting has just opened. Please select your answer. A lot of interest in this question. Great. And the results. Heavy bias towards B, Hawaii. Not necessarily surprising, but Hamish, what are your thoughts?
Well, I chose E, and here what I really meant to say was that I think we're going to see the utility scale deployment really at the transmission level, because that's where the economics can be made to work today for energy storage, particularly as a substitute or replacement for peaker plants. And I think that economics, given it works today, will probably continue to work, and we'll probably see that more, as opposed to at the distribution level.
Gotcha. Interesting. Kip?
I chose B, Hawaii, and really what shaped my thinking there was just how at the forefront Hawaii was in general with alternative energy. It just made logical sense that as energy storage becomes more and more feasible and here's now, that they would lead the major thrust there.
Great.
I actually chose, I was debating between A and B. I completely concur with Kip on Hawaii, but I decided to vote for New York.
Okay.
The reason for it is because we're talking in the next 5 years. My thinking was that New York is in the midst of developing a new regulatory framework that will allow utilities to own storage, and they will require utilities to think outside the box to provide storage solutions to traditional T&D problems. And I believe it could be a potential, I wasn't 100% confident, but it could be a potential for a major utility owner scale energy storage deployment. I'm not sure in the size of megawatts, but more in the number of applications that they will try to use to demonstrate their ability to transition from the typical T&D investments to new innovative technologies.
Martha, what are you thinking?
B, Hawaii, because of the opportunity that we've seen to date with high-pen PV. This is really the only utility to date at this scale. And so as we've done tests with Hawaiian Electric, those have been following the NREL research studies that we've been doing with Solar City HECO, and really opening the doors for PV to scale up significantly in Hawaii. I think that's the natural place now for this energy storage deployment pipeline.
Great. 2 more questions separate you guys and lunch, so we'll move forward. What will be the most important reliability tool that regulated utilities will be using in 2020? So this is a reliability-related question. A number of folks in the room I know are focused on these projects. Will it be A, intelligent switches, B, actual distributed energy resources themselves, whether they be utility-owned or procured, customer-owned resources, advanced load forecasting and modeling, or advanced power electronics? Voting is now open. Please select your answer. Great. And the results, advanced load forecasting seems to be the winner, although it's pretty spread across the answers. Kip, what are your thoughts on this one?
I chose D, advanced load forecasting, modeling and analytics. There's a direct relationship from the empirical data that you can collect across your grid operations and feed that into your load forecasting and modeling analysis. I think as with the IoT and the more connectivity that is established, you'll see more and more real-time analysis going on. And because of that, I think it will help step up a lot of the solutions for dealing with reliability.
Great. As one of our reliability experts on stage.
So I agree with Kip. However, I think we have to be a step ahead of it. Or Kip is a step ahead of my answer. And the reason I picked E, advanced power electronics, is because you have to outfit the grid with the devices to provide the data that you're discussing or referring to. So the modernization of the grid, as we discussed earlier, has to be in place in order for us to harness the data, turn the data into information, and operate the grid in such efficiency to achieve the increased reliability or the improved reliability that we could get from the grid. But the beginning of it has to be the power electronics, the ability to deploy smart switches and sensors and monitoring to improve our situational awareness all the way to the edge of the grid.
Great. Namish?
I similarly chose E, mostly because the challenge in reliability going forward, yes, comes from things like increasing storm-induced outages, but also comes from the fact that the net power flows in the distribution system are increasingly unpredictable, whether that's because of export due to solar or whether that's because of adoption of electric vehicles. The time constants over which power now needs to be regulated are becoming smaller and smaller. And so reliability takes on an aspect that requires very fine-grained control.
Great. Martha?
So I chose D, advanced load forecast and modeling analytics, because we need to get better grid control, and a way to do that is through forecasting, modeling, and utilizing that data information to make the right decisions to gain control of the grid.
So none of you selected distributed energy resources. Does anyone want to comment as to why? Yeah, Namish.
Well, so my answer really was E and B, because now that the supply side of the equation is increasingly coming now from the customer, without control over that customer asset, it'll be very difficult to dimension the capacity of the system without some level of control over the endpoint. Otherwise, you end up having to invest in copper to levels that increase rates for everyone. And so, as we're seeing in Germany, as we're also seeing in Hawaii and parts of California, there will be a need to curtail solar during peak times. When I say peak of solar. And if you weren't to do that, your only option is to invest in a lot of cabling, a lot of copper, to be able to accommodate those peaks. So really, it's a combination of power electronics to manage power flows, but selective and hopefully infrequent curtailment to manage against capacity.
Great.
I think the tricky part is 2020. So besides several areas in the nation, such as California and Hawaii and several others, by 2020, it will be hard for utilities to rely on DER for reliability.
Right.
So I think I agree with you folks that I don't think it will be that soon across the industry that we will be able to use B for that purpose.
Okay.
And I also agree that the power electronics has to lead. I think when you talk about latency, that is key. And the thought that you can centralize a lot of your activity or actions that you need to take on the grid, the latency won't allow for it as the grid gets more and more complicated because of distributed energy resources.
So part of the grid modernization piece is the communication and security aspect of information, and I think that this ties back. We can't operate those devices fast enough to be able to get that data in. So there's so much ahead of us in order for us to get to good load forecast and modeling, and using that data to actually get to the reliability improvements we're looking to have.
Great. Final question for folks is, by 2020, so in the next 5 years, how many states will adopt new rate designs to value the integration of customer-owned distributed energy resources? So what this is really asking is, how fast do we think a number of these states will move and be able to help put in the new business models and market mechanisms in place? Do you think it'll be A, 0 to 4, B, 5 to 9, C, 10 to 14, D, 15 to 19, and E, more than 20 or more? And just so folks know, we at GTM are tracking about 21 of these open cases at the moment, and so it'll be interesting to hear from the audience as well as other folks how fast they actually think a lot of these proceedings will move. Final question, and voting is open. Great. Pretty evenly split-ish, with about a bit of a bias towards 5 to 9. Martha, what are you? You're close to some of this.
So I put D, 15 to 19. That's because I believe that this is going to happen regardless if people are going to be happy or not. As this is the way it is. So and it's by 2020. So you've got some time there to. That this is just the way it's going to occur in the future.
Einat.
I actually voted B, 5 to 9. The reason for it is because regulators move slowly. And even if they moved, to get to an actual rate design that is implemented will take additional time. So I think we have over 20 states that are active in this territory. I believe some will proceed, as such New York is proceeding at a fairly good pace, but it will still take them quite a bit to actually accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So I'm a little more, I'll be on the slow curve on that, and 5 to 9 is my vote.
Gotcha. Kip?
Yeah, I chose B. I thought we'd get a little closer to 5, but get kind of halfway there. And I think I agree with you. I think a lot of it comes down to just the speed of how the regulatory bodies move. I do think we're seeing, again, as I stated earlier, more and more consumers wanting that choice and to be more control of their reliability.
Hamish?
Yeah, I chose B also, in part because I can sort of name at least 3 where the need is there and the progress towards or I should say perhaps convergence on what those rate design changes should be seems to be occurring. I do think after 2020 we may see an acceleration though, because I think once a couple of states make the change and assuming that the change is successful, then other states will follow. So I think the hardest part here is to get the first 3 to 6 to actually make the change. It's a difficult thing to do. But once they do it, then I think we'll find others will jump in.
Great. So with that, I think we're at time. A round of applause for our panelists.